name, rank, and number.
Private Whittle J, 36360.
Ta!
Ta!
Well now, what's the charge, Sergeant Major?
Gross dereliction of duty resulting in loss of government property, sir.
What government property?
Underpants, woolen, privates for the use of. One, sir.
Well, how did he manage that? Where were they?
I regret to report they were on his person, sir.
What? You mean to say he was actually wearing them?
Yes, sir. About his lower person, sir.
Good cat.
Hello and welcome to another RTS Yorkshire Talks. I'm Fiona Thompson and I'm chair of RTS Yorkshire. Now recently we held our RTS Yorkshire Programme Awards, and it's fair to say that we didn't expect a 1968 British comedy to win the award for professional excellence in post-production for drama and comedy. That's exactly what happened. The winner was a restored version of Carry On Up the Khyber, done by ITV Content Delivery for Britbox. And here to talk all about it is James Macmillan, who's the Business Development Manager for ITV Content Delivery. So, James, it's great to have you with us here today. And how did you feel when you heard that you got that award?
Firstly, thanks for having me, Fiona. We were totally blown away when we saw the nominations, never mind the announcement of the award. It's been a very, very tough year for everyone, but I can't think of a better way to have ended 2020 than winning the award. Entering for the RTS Yorkshire Centre Awards couldn't have been further from our mind. Again, never mind being shortlisted or winning. When we first got the work from Britbox, we were just so excited about the work coming to us, and it's been quite a journey to kind of come away with our very first award. So yeah, thank you very much. I think we're still coming to terms of it, to be honest, Fiona.
Well, and the award will come to you eventually. You will get that physical award. It will appear. So, James, take us back to the beginning. How did this all begin for you and ITV Content Delivery?
So, we've been digitising ITV's archive for a long time, and we've been transferring ITV's archive primarily as a distribution hub on behalf of ITV when they're making global sales to broadcasters around the world. Obviously, the industry's changed with technical innovations over the years, and in the last 5 or so years, we've started bringing the film transfer and restoration back in-house to ITV. And the reason why we got Carrying Up the Khyber into the office as a piece of work to do was back in 2019, we were tasked at providing all the content for the launch of Britbox at the end of last year. So my project last year was to kind of work through a fantastic amount of work to make sure there was an embarrassment of riches on the Britbox platform from lots of different broadcasters. And about 2 or 3 months before the launch of Britbox, the editorial team decided that they'd like some films to go alongside the television content that they were offering. So I had a look at the films and recognised quickly that some of them were only available in standard definition, but that in our archive in Leeds, we had the 35mm neg. So in content delivery, we took a reel of a Carry On film, I can't remember what it was now, out of the archive and transferred it. And we picked a couple of scenes to restore. We did invited Britbox up to Leeds, where we're based, and said, this is what the film will look like on the platform, which is fine. And this is what the content could look like on the platform. And there was a real night and day difference between before and after. And, when it was very easy to show the level of detail in the scenes that we did. I think Kenneth Williams had quite a bespoke pattern on his on the suit, and you could see like all the pinstripe details, very, very clearly. And another character was smoking a cigarette, and there was such a rich texture to the cigarette smoke as it came through the frame. And I was saying to Britbox, I used to be an editor, and I know that when you're watching content or programs or films, you're always drawn subconsciously as a viewer to the performer's eyes, and that's where the performance is really. So I was saying, if you can see the difference in the detail of someone's pattern on their suit or the richness in the texture of the smoke, you're actually going to get in a much more nuanced performance from the actors, and therefore a more fulfilling viewing experience when you're watching a film.
And is there a danger, do you think, that through cleaning them, because I've seen the restoration work obviously on Carry On Up the Khyber and some of the other things that you've been doing, is there a danger that we lose that, what was very specific and idiosyncratic about it at the time?
There's a very real danger of doing that. So one of the things that we're very, very careful of, in fact, it's a core value of content deliveries, is that we're not in the restoration landscape environment to be making those editorial changes. We're very, very strict about how much we restore, what elements we're changing, what artifacts we're taking out. And we had a fairly steep learning curve very early on in our film transfer and restoration journey. And we'd done a test on Captain Scarlet, which, decades old. And we thought we could run a very automated, fast process with restoration. So we kind of hit restore on this piece of software, and the material was actually quite badly scratched. So it took out all the scratches, but to the algorithms in the software, all the puppet strings that Jerry Anderson and his team used to manipulate the puppets, those strings look exactly like film scratches. So all of those were taken out as well, which I'm sure back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, Jerry Anderson would have loved to have achieved that. But, for modern audiences and audiences that have grown up enjoying those programs, the puppet strings are actually part of the aesthetic and the charm and why people enjoy watching those programs. I do anyway. And we quickly realized that we had no right to make that change. And we've kind of, that's been like a foundation of our approach to film transfer and restoration. We don't have Alfred Hitchcock or Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, to name check some of the directors whose films we've been working on this year. We don't have them at our disposal to kind of say, what did you think about this? We've got to kind of use like an existing reference and be wary of kind of what their intentions were when they made the film originally, but also what their limitations were. We don't want a Carry On film to look like it was made in the 2020s or the 21st century. We want it to kind of stay as it would have looked 50, 60, 70 years ago, but equally want it to look as good as it possibly could have looked the very first time it was presented. Yeah. So we're very mindful. There's a real kind of trial and error. The restoration software is kind of inclined almost to run at kind of 100% aggressiveness. So like looking for lots of imperfections within an image and eradicating them. What we're doing is we apply an effect and we go through like a trial and error, lots of reviewing and slowly incrementing aggressiveness or decreasing the aggressiveness of the effect, just to ensure that we're staying true to those intentions and limitations. I think if you were to kind of put science and art on a Venn diagram, the overlap that you would see would be kind of that sweet spot where film restoration should lie, I think.
It's really pleasing to hear, because it's that sense that there's still there is software to help, but it's still got that human judgment, that editorial or authorship going into it as well. But creating something that is true to the people like me who saw it first time around, but actually to a brand new audience, which presumably is where you're hoping to go with Britbox and with these.
Completely. I think if we can think that there's audiences out there that might have heard of Carry On but never seen it, I'm sure they'd be much more inclined to see a glorious looking presentation, as good as it could have looked in the 70s or 60s when it was originally made. I'm hoping they'll be a lot more encouraged to watch it, because it'll be a much more palatable viewing experience. Not kind of the juddery, shaky, dusty, dirty, scratched image that you sometimes associate with older films.
Yeah, and that brings me back to the software and the fact that software is developing, and what you're doing presumably influences that software, as it isn't doing quite what you were wanting to do, and particularly around things like scratches and things like that.
Yeah, we've worked very, very closely with the manufacturers of the software, and if there are, let's say, problems that we encounter, and each film is entirely unique, we come across, every time we enter a restoration project, we come across problems and hurdles that we've never come across before, just because, like, film is a living organism, like we are, and we're all different, and film is no different in it. So sometimes a film could have been stored perfectly for 80 years, and we scan it through the system and there's not a blemish or a scratch. And other times we could have film from the 1990s that hasn't had the same TLC and is kind of scratched and dirty. And it's such a broad spectrum. We were recently restoring Michael Powell's and Emmerich Pressburger's Ill Met by Moonlight. And ordinarily, a film, an image that you look at on a screen will go through a scanner on its side. So when films are scratched, it tends to be because as a film runs through on its side, the scratches run across the image top to bottom. Now, with Powell and Pressburger's Ill Met by Moonlight, for some reason the scratches were across sideways,
left to right,
the bottom on the image as you watched it.
Yeah.
And we don't know how those scratches got there, and because it wasn't a common direction of a scratch, we had to really think on our feet to kind of come up with a solution. None of the software has been designed to look for horizontal scratches. It's always looking for vertical ones. And Josh, who did the work on Carrying Up the Khyber, in his kind of hour of need, he managed to come up with a solution where we'd flip the image on its side and then perform the scratch removal tool, which allowed us to kind of clean horizontal scratches vertically, if that makes sense. Probably easier to draw a map and navigate around that.
But it's that learning curve, isn't it, for you and the software engineers, as you come across these problems and work clever ways of how to remove the blemishes.
I suppose if we're not looking to innovate and change the way we do stuff as we're taught, there'll always be things that come up that we won't ever be able to clean. So, and it's often like the simplest idea that, very simple idea, just to flip an image and it was a really neat solution. We've since fed that back to the manufacturers of software, and they're looking at kind of what they can do with that example going forwards. So it's a good partnership. We're feeding into the restoration community feedback of our examples of issues and problems, and they're kind of letting us know when other people have had, when they've kind of created new tools to help combat other obstacles that other customers may have come across. But yeah, it's nice to be kind of leading the conversation sometimes, but just to be part of the conversation is a privilege as well.
Great, isn't it? And as you know, because we've talked about this before, I've seen a number of the little videos you've done which have the split screen of the before and the after.
Head in hand. Please give name, rank, and number.
Private Whittle J 36360.
Well, now, what's the charge, Sergeant Major?
Gross dereliction of duty resulting in loss of government property, sir.
What government property?
Underpants, woolen, privates for the use of. One, sir.
Well, how did he manage that? Where were they?
I regret to report they were on his person, sir.
What? You mean to say he was actually wearing them?
Yes, sir. About his lower person, sir.
And the one thing I'm utterly fascinated about is how on earth you get rid of that film Judder.
So the film Judder is, I think knowing why the film Judder takes place is probably the best way to rectify it. So as I said before, film is a living organism, and as it gets older, it starts to kind of shrink and decay morbidly, just like we probably will. And so film kind of comes with perforations along the top, sometimes the bottom, depending on the size of the film, and they're called sprocket holes. And the film is scanners, they use sprockets which are perfectly aligned with those holes to kind of move and mechanically move the film past the lens to capture. Now, when the film shrinks, those sprocket holes are no longer perfectly aligned with the sprockets on the device. So there's a bit of a crinkle sometimes as it moves. We can adjust the sprocket sizes, by the way, just depending on how badly film has shrunken. But it's not always 100% perfect. When it isn't perfect, you see the image kind of bounce as it goes past the lens. And in some very bad circumstances, the film might warp a little bit as well. So it will kind of twist as it passes the camera. So you get this kind of underwater effect. And what the software will be doing is it'll be looking on a 3D axis where the image isn't stable and looking to lock different parts down depending on the severity of the image. Or what we'll do is if it's just like a straightforward bounce, we'll isolate kind of a part of the frame that should be in that position, and the software will kind of map that frame to that position, that point of that frame to that position. So when you play it back, there's like all sorts of mathematical code going on in the background to kind of ensure that the image is steady. Sometimes if it's a handheld image, you'd be hard pressed to notice that instability. But for kind of feature films on tripods and stuff that shouldn't be bouncing, it really does stand out. So if you can lock that down, again, the viewing experience is so much more pleasurable if you're not having to, track an image with your eyes or your forehead.
Absolutely. I mean, it's magical to watch it, even though behind it there are all these algorithms and all the mathematics going on. But if we take something like Ill Met by Moonlight, which I know you've just done, the Powell and Pressburger film, how long would it take for the process from beginning to end of the restoration?
Again, we, as a rule of thumb, we tend to say it'll take about a week to transfer one reel of film. I would say transfer, including restoration. So, so there's lots and lots of variables. So different reels are different lengths, and different films are different lengths and have different amounts of reels. So it is just a finger in the air estimate. And again, it's so dependent on the condition of the film, the quality of the archive, the quality of the stock, how it's been looked after, how many times it's moved, how many times a can has been opened. So yeah, in an ideal world, everything would have been restored perfectly, and you could lace it through the scanner, hit scan, and you would just get a perfect image. And then every time you add in, like, every time you open the film, like, dust gets on there. So the fewer times as possible that you touch the film, the less chance there is of it being dusty. The fewer times you play the film through the scanners, the less chance there is of introducing scratches. The sooner you digitize film, the less chance there is of that film shrinking. So, you know, you have all these kind of factors that once you apply them all, it kind of multiplies the time required to get a clean image.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of variables in there.
there just isn't a one size fits all. It's very difficult to quote for.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah. And who chooses the films? Who says to you for Britbox, oh, we want this done?
So there's an editorial team based in London, and they're looking at, you know, I think there's still an element of learning with Britbox. It's such a new platform. It's just past its first anniversary, and you know, they're kind of learning about what content is really landing with their audience and what content they can add to complement that programming. The having exclusive content. So with the carry-ons, they've never been seen in high definition before. And the, you know, the Powell and Pressburger, the Hitchcock stuff, again, it's stuff that has probably only ever been seen in standard definition. So having stuff that is in a much higher resolution and being digitally cleaned and removed of artifacts and imperfections is a real selling point for the platform. These films are exclusively on Britbox, and from speaking with Britbox, I know that the restored films massively outperform the SD content or the content that might be available in HD, but it's available in other places in HD as well. And I think it's by a fairly significant factor. So there's definitely like appetite for more films to be restored. And I think the really good thing about that, from, you know, the archivist in me is kind of really keen that we're the custodians of ITV's archive, and we've got film dating back to the 1920s in the vaults in Leeds, and we've got like a duty of care to that content to make sure that it is preserved and it is available for future generations to watch and enjoy. And having a platform like Britbox certainly accelerates that preservation and restoration aspect to the archive side of ITV's business. So the best quality content is now stored in our archive for future generations and audiences to enjoy when the time comes.
Well, I'm glad there, James, that you've raised the issue of archives, because we're going to be next year doing an RTS Yorkshire event on the importance of archiving, because I think these days with the cloud and with digital, people think that perhaps archiving is no longer so important, but I know for you it is still so
Yeah,
important.
we're constantly at the mercy of decisions that people made 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And you only need to think about how busy our days and routines and jobs are these days, and you get to Friday afternoon and you think, I'm just parking that because it's a weekend and I've had enough this week. And I suspect those were the same kind of feelings and emotions that employees and archivists had decades and decades ago. And we're kind of paying for that now. So we're learning lessons as to, oh, it says that this is mute, but where's the audio for, reel 7 of whatever? So it's really important that we are archiving stuff. We're kind of accruing as much intelligence and data and knowledge for specific films and the component reels of each film, so that it's much easier to find and source stuff in an organized way in order for us to kind of exploit, distribute that content as quickly and as successfully as possible in the future.
But doesn't that also mean having the technology that dates back to the 1920s and through into the future? I mean, I remember when I started working at Yorkshire Television, we moved from film to video, and we were filming on Beta SP.
Yeah.
How many people have got Beta SP machines these days?
That's probably more than you think. But what condition they're in is probably another question. So yeah, ITV's been making programs as a broadcaster and a producer for 65 plus years now, and we've been making Coronation Street for 60. And obviously, over the decades, ITV has acquired or merged with other companies. And the oldest piece of content that we have in our archive dates back to the 1920s. And that means, really, that in order to play and process that content, we need technology that also dates back to the 1920s and that caters for every single technical innovation and every technical standard that's been introduced and every tape format that's been introduced throughout that time. I often refer to our machine room as a working museum or a live time capsule, because you come in and there's machines where the technology was introduced in the 1930s. That's just to kind of capture a specific type of tape that we have in our archive. Or we've got other devices that aren't as old, but I mean, there probably hasn't been a new tape format in 10 or 15 years. So really anything on tape is safe to be considered legacy or heritage. It's just some tape formats are more legacy or heritage than others. It's a real kind of pressure point in the archive industry because Sony or Panasonic no longer make kind of the formats or support the formats that were introduced 50 years ago. So if we find our U-matic or D2 or 1-inch machines break, we can't ring the manufacturer and say, can you send someone out to fix this, please? Because all the kind of service people with the skills and the engineers with the skills to repair are retired or no longer with us. And we tend to have, I'm always on the lookout for people selling old tape decks so that we can cannibalize for spare parts. I think we've got, some decks which are the equivalent of Trigger's broom from Only Fools and Horses.
Yeah.
It's a little bit from that machine that stopped working and a little bit from that machine that stopped working, and you're left with like Frankenstein's D2 deck, but but it works, and it's a means to an end. And because, you know, if I rang Sony and said, I need a new pinch roller for a D2, they'd say, you know, what are you ringing us for? We haven't made those since 1992.
Well, they'd go, oh, what? You want it?
Maybe. I'd hope not. But, you know, by looking for old machines and salvaging and cannibalizing machines for spare parts, we're kind of adding some protection to our archive and other people's. But actually, there's an environmental impact as well that's often forgotten. You know, we're kind of stopping, we're shredding every machine of its absolute last resource, really. And, you know, we're preventing landfills being overwhelmed with decks and stuff. So, yeah, there's an environmental benefit to what we're doing, as well as a business continuity benefit.
Yeah, and an aesthetic benefit as well. Because I'm just thinking about all the programs that went through our awards recently, nominations and the winners. They, in a few years' time, will need restoring if we're still going to be able to access them.
I hope so. No, yeah, I think, you know, we're 4K is feeling like that'll be, you know, it's already in people's homes, and there's manufacturers that are already making 8K and 16K cameras and lenses. And I think for the, you know, the other winners of the RTS Awards this year, so Gentleman Jack and Last Tango in Halifax, those programs will probably been shot 4K. Now, if there's a huge innovation in the next 10, 20, 30 years where we all have 16K monitors in our home and stuff, in order to make that content look as contemporary as it might need to, those programs, those contemporary programs that are being made now, may need to come to a facility like ours in the future in order to add value, to make them more attractive to streaming platforms or broadcasters, to kind of narrow the gap between the limitations that exist today versus what the standard is tomorrow, if that makes sense.
It does make sense indeed. And what's absolutely wonderful for me is because Yorkshire Television is a very important place, it's a very important building to a lot of us. And so the fact that this is in ITV Yorkshire, and it's where a lot of ITV stuff is coming here, but not just ITV, as you say, these films are coming into Leeds and into those studios on Kirkstall Road. So how important is that to you that it's Yorkshire?
On a very personal note, my dad used to be an editor at Yorkshire Television, say 100 years ago. And you know, I remember as a little boy going to see my dad at work, and to think that we're kind of looking after some of the programs that my dad may have made and making them like able to be kind of watched by maybe my children is kind of like a nice feeling, like a passing the baton down generations. But I think, you know, Yorkshire being able to introduce a new capability into Yorkshire is a really big deal for not just myself, but for content delivery. You know, we're really proud of the fact that we're based in Leeds, that we're from Yorkshire, that we're based in Yorkshire. And, you know, we know that we're 200 miles away from the production hub in London, and, I know, 50, 60 miles away from Media City in Manchester. But, you know, Channel 4 moving to Leeds, Sky kind of building their profile and presence in Leeds as well, to be able to kind of contribute to that growth in the region, and it be an entirely new kind of capacity and capability in the region. That's fantastic. We can't believe how lucky we are, really. And the hope is in the coming months and years that we'll be able to attract work from outside Yorkshire into Yorkshire to be restored and transferred and preserved to, for any customer outside of ITV, outside of Yorkshire, and that we're kind of playing our part in preserving archives for the future. And again, hopefully in time, we can start to kind of, bring in more restoration, more transfer, more archivists into this industry and sector by working closely with maybe universities and production companies and facilities, so that we're seen as the leaders in the North, really.
That's brilliant, James. Thank you so much, because I think the pioneering work that you and your team do is really, really important for us. As you say, it's legacy, and it's passing on that legacy. So Thank you very much for talking to us today. Thank you for talking to me, and we wish you well with the future, and we look forward to seeing what's next coming out from ITV Content Delivery on Britbox.
You'll see.
Thanks a lot, James. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care. Bye for now.